Come this time of year, there is a debate that rages from coast to coast in regards to best rivalry in college football. This is one that I serve up as not necessarily the best or the fiercest, but it's certainly the prettiest on the field when you match up those uniforms and the bright Southern California sunshine, whether it be at the LA Coliseum or this year at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. USC and UCLA, and certainly they're about as close as two rivals can be in regards to proximity and drawing players from that rich Southern California talent base. We bring in Scott Wolf from Inside USC to break down the matchup and also talk beyond this season, because this game's not as big as it typically is in regards to results on the field, but what it means towards the future of Clay Helton and the USC program. Scott, we appreciate you stopping by.
No problem. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing just fine. So I got to tell you, as a Midwesterner, going way back, this was always Ohio State, Michigan Day. And then when that game concluded, we'd dive right into USC, UCLA, and you would have that natural transition of going from it could typically be a beautiful fall day in the Midwest, or it could be brutal at that point. It's kind of a wild card, and then going right into the West Coast game with USC and UCLA. But things have been cluttered up in college football in regards to TV schedules and the like, and not quite as simple as the good old days. But this is one that I always like to watch. So before we dive into the specific matchup and what's going on with USC, can you give us a flavor, a feel for what makes this one special and different?
Well, I mean, obviously, they're about 11 miles apart, the two schools. So most rivalries, there's much more distance between schools, and both in a big city, LA. And I think what's unique is you have a lot of kids on both teams. They all know each other. A lot of them played at the same high schools, maybe. But they've all played together in the summers, or they all are friends or talk trash to each other all the time. So they see each other, by accident sometimes when they go out on the weekends or do things. So there's just a lot of familiarity, and whoever wins the game, the loser's going to hear about it for a year. So that's why they hate losing, because they know they're going to run into people and they're going to hear about it a lot. And the guys that graduate, they're hearing about games, the rest of their lives in the rivalry. So even though the teams might not be having the best seasons, for the players, there's a lot at stake still.
Absolutely. And what you mentioned about years in the future, you'll even hear players make mention of, I was 4-0 against team blank, or I was 1-3, or they're probably not going to mention that, but you'll hear the 4-year record mentioned in these rivalry games, a game that we can see at 12:30 West Coast time on Fox. USC at the Rose Bowl against UCLA. Of course, a disappointing season for both teams. We'll focus on USC. So in recent weeks, we've seen a loss against Cal. Most recently, a game that was back and forth, kind of a defensive struggle. Anything that came out of that game that catches your eye in regards to continued development somewhere? Obviously, the outcome wasn't what people expected or wanted to see at the Coliseum, but in regards to, I watched the second half of the game, or maybe a regression for this USC team.
Well, yeah, I'd say there's a continued development of their inconsistent play, and they're not able to put teams away. Even Oregon State, the worst team the week before, they couldn't put them away. And, it bit them hard. They made some atrocious errors in the Cal game with penalties and turnovers, bad snaps. So they find ways to shoot themselves in the foot every week. And then that means no matter who they're playing, no matter what the team's record is, you can't positively say the other team has no chance at winning the game. And they struggled a lot. You watch the second half, they only had 41 yards of offense in the second half in 31 plays, I believe. So that's pretty bad. So, that's not what you should be doing at the end of the season. And there's just a lot of, we talked, I think, even in August about fan discontent. And, it's been there the whole season, and it's it's really reaching a high point, I think, in November.
I'm looking at these Pac-12 South Division standings. Of course, USC lost at Utah. They beat Arizona. I'm not coming up with the Arizona State score off the top of my head. I believe they lost that game as well,
Yeah.
correct?
They lost to Arizona State, yes.
Yes. So, yeah, they have lost all the tiebreakers of the teams that are ahead of them with 3 losses. USC stands at 4-4 in the conference. Of course, they've got a very difficult game against Notre Dame to conclude. So, 5-7 is a possibility, or 6-6, certainly, as they are favored against a UCLA team that comes in at only with 2 wins in the conference and 2 wins overall. So,
They've
you
got to
talk
win
about
this
the
game. Also, I don't want to interrupt, but if they lose this game, they have to win 6 games to be bowl eligible, because the Pac-12 has a rule now that if you go 5-7, you cannot go to a bowl game. So if they lose tomorrow, they would have to beat Notre Dame, which nobody thinks they're going to do. So that puts a lot of pressure on them.
Absolutely. And just making a bowl game is obviously not the standard at USC. I think most reasonable fans were comfortable with maybe 8 or 9 wins, considering new quarterback, very difficult out of conference schedule. Notre Dame's going to be really good. They had to face Texas on the road early. And of course, Stanford was expected to be a little bit better, and that was a road game early. So there was thoughts that, okay, this is not necessarily going to be a championship caliber college football playoff contending type team like it has been the past few years, but in a weak division, still should have the best personnel top to bottom on the roster, should compete for a Pac-12 championship. Well, they have to a certain extent out of default of the division being so bad. But is that basically where the scales rest, where 11-1 wasn't expected, so 8-4 competing for a Pac-12 championship game would have been fine for the reasonable fan, versus what we're seeing now, where the team is just regressing week to week, as you mentioned, and Clay Helton's job may be in jeopardy.
Yeah, I think, they've lost 2 games at the Coliseum after winning 19 straight there. And I think that's kind of tipped the balance, because they lost to Arizona State and Cal. Those are teams they don't normally lose to. So if they win those games, they've got 3 losses. Maybe they lose to Notre Dame. It's a 4-loss season. People aren't happy, but, it's considered a rebuilding year. But now, they're looking, like you said, they're looking at 5-7, and they're in a total meltdown right now. So I don't know. Not too many people imagined they would be this bad. So I've always said I thought they'd be a 500 team if they didn't have Sam Darnold, and they're kind of proving that this year. But it's been many reasons that they've been this bad. But there was probably about 35 to 40,000 people at the game Saturday. So you're seeing a lot of people just kind of giving up on the team at this point.
Yeah, you apparently and obviously know the team much better than I do. I had them projected at 8-4, I for first place. I had them losing at Utah, and that being the tiebreaker to send the Utes to the Pac-12 championship game was my preseason prognostication. But they've dropped a few more games than that. And when Clay Helton's when the people that really have a perspective on what the university and what Lynn Swann would be looking at in evaluating the situation, what is the reasonable expectation of the odds of him being let go based on the performance versus the expectations versus the money involved and the coaching possibilities out there?
Well, the truth is, not many people know what Lynn Swann's thinking,
Yeah.
because he doesn't say a whole lot. He made a couple comments that the football program is in good shape, and that he supports Clay Helton. He didn't say for sure he's coming back. So there's a big guessing game right now about what he's going to do, because a lot of people wanted to make a move. He seems in the past like he's been reluctant to make changes. So, the question for them too is, do they have the money to do it? Because they've got some lawsuits they've been dealing with. with their medical center, and students are suing them. They just paid $200 million in the first wave of some lawsuits, and there's questions. They don't have a president right now. They have an interim president, so we're not even sure SWAN has the authority to make a change right now. He probably could if he really wants to. I think he could, but there's a lot of mystery right now about what he would do if he does fire Helton. A lot of the people naturally mention Jack Del Rio as a candidate because he played at USC. That would probably disappoint a lot of people, but it's kind of fitting the history of what they do, where they kind of just go for somebody who has USC ties. So the interesting thing will be, if they do make a change, will they try to go outside, which they rarely do. But I think that's what they need to do is go find somebody on the outside.
Get Scott Wolf on the line from inside USC, and he joins us on a fairly regular basis to break down the Trojans and this season just plummeting week by week. Jack Del Rio, yeah, that's not the kind of hire that people are looking for that's going to excite or galvanize the fan base. But at the same time, he's accomplished. He's led winning teams in the NFL, not just like one time, but he's had a pretty good coaching stay with a couple of clubs in the NFL, most notably Jacksonville. And so it's a safe selection in regards to, most likely the program's not going to come off the rails with this guy. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing he has going for him is, if USC just has a competent coach, they're probably going to win 9 games a year. So, you would think he would come in and hire good assistant coaches and probably wouldn't screw up things, at least. The problem's going to be for the people who want to get to the college football playoff and they want to see USC get back to its glory days. Is he going to be that guy that can lead you to that? And that's in doubt. So, they want to get somebody also that would make a splash like Chip Kelly at UCLA did. I mean, this is their rival, and they've got a big name coach at UCLA. So does USC need somebody of that nature? So there's a lot of questions, and USC doesn't typically have a search committee like other schools to go hire a coach. So that's where we get some of these weird hires, and that's why there's a lot of speculation about what might happen.
So you bring up something right there that you'll have to give us some insight on in terms of the thought process for as much as you possibly can, because yes, USC's the star in town. UCLA is striving for respect, doesn't have the tradition, doesn't have the fan base. I'm guessing it's a 80-20, 70-30 proposition within LA, Southern Cal.
Probably now it's, with UCLA not winning very much in the last few years, their support has gone down a lot. But, if USC doesn't turn things around, it's going to even up pretty quickly. It just depends who's winning. That's okay. Southern California likes winners. And that's why you see, the Dodgers and Lakers seems like that make dramatic changes because they know they got to get winning teams out on the field or the court, or fans are not going to go watch them play. The Rams are very popular right now, but 2 years ago they weren't drawing big crowds. So you got to win in a town that's as busy and diverse as Southern California, is.
Yeah. So on the other hand, Scott, obviously we've got the situation with JT Daniels. So the quarterback position being the most important and the most scrutinized on the field. I think there's an understanding by, again, reasonable people that there could be some struggles with a freshman quarterback still, based on what we see all over the country with freshmen succeeding at that position, especially in recent years, that there's a reasonable expectation that you're going to see substantial development, substantial growth, progress. You're going to see much better games being played in weeks 10 and 11 versus week 1. And we haven't necessarily seen that out of JT Daniels. Obviously, he needs the complementary pieces to do their jobs as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big burden with him from day one is he came in with more hype than any quarterback ever, practically. I mean, even the other guys playing across the nation that are true freshmen, they didn't have the hype he had. He was the Gatorade National Player of the Year. I mean, everyone said he was a great quarterback. So he's struggling. And then the bigger issue is they played Jack Sears, the backup, against Arizona State, and a lot of people thought he looked better than JT Daniels. So they should have a quarterback controversy, but Clay Helton's been very loyal to Daniels, and he's eliminated any suspense about who might start these games. So when Daniels starts struggling, people get frustrated quicker. And I don't even think, from what I've seen and heard, even within the team, there's a split about who should be playing quarterback. And, he hasn't been a great leader, which is not probably unusual since he's a true freshman, but that hasn't helped his cause either. So even if he plays the next couple games, next year, a lot of people are going to want to see a true quarterback competition. So this is just like one more thing to add to the list of problems they've had this season.
Scott Wolf on the line from inside USC, breaking down the Trojans as they face UCLA and then Notre Dame the next week, trying to get to a bowl game and get some more practice time for its players and just reach a expectation, even though the expectations are far exceeding just making a bowl game. At least they're they would avoid the embarrassment of not reaching postseason play like 80 other teams do across the FBS landscape. So in regards to this particular game, do you have a good feel for this game in regards to USC? I got to think that they're maybe a touchdown to 10-point favorite in this game because UCLA's been that bad. I'll look up the line here. But your take on UCLA and USC?
I think it's hard to get a good feel on USC for any game because they could win every game and they could lose every game. So you just never know from week to week. I think the biggest problem is they don't put teams away. They don't put the bad teams away. They had Cal down 14-0. Cal's not a big comeback team, and they gave Cal too many chances to come back and eke out a win. They were up 21-0 on Oregon State, and Oregon State came back and scored 2 touchdowns. They've never dominated any team to the point where you just know it's an easy blowout victory. So UCLA might have 2 wins all season, and they might have a bad defense and all the other things, but they're not going to be out of this game most likely, no matter what, unless USC plays like they've never played this season before. So I think it's going to be a tight game, and I think it can go either way. So the thing is, UCLA, this is kind of their season right here. I mean, this is like their bowl game, so they've got a lot to play for. And last week they lost to Arizona State by 3. They've been playing teams losing, but playing competitive games. So that would lead me to believe they can play with USC at home, and I think it'll be a close game. And if USC there's a feeling within the team that things are kind of snowballing. If there's a little adversity, you might see some people pack it in a little bit. So that's why I think it's going to be a close game.
Yeah, at one point in the season, it was looking so bad for UCLA. People were looking at the schedule and saying, "Who's this team going to beat? They're going to go 0-12." Well, they knocked out a couple wins mid-season, and again, 2-8 is not what we expected from Chip Kelly. But he's got the buffer of, hey, this is the first season, this is a rebuild. Versus Clay Helton, he took over a team that was already established for the most part, and the progression has not been there the last couple of years. Vegas has kind of fooled me on this one. USC just a 3.5-point favorite at the Rose Bowl against UCLA, and there you go.
Well, I think that speaks to USC. They're not, the odds makers are not impressed with USC, so that's why it's such a tight spread.
Absolutely. In some of these rivalry games, Scott, there's a mention of as a sidebar how it's going to affect recruiting. I wouldn't think that a kid, unless he's just wowed by the atmosphere of, let's say, if it was a typical USC UCLA game in which both teams were vying for a Pac-12 championship game. Both teams were ranked, or at least one of them. Let's say USC was 9-1 and UCLA was having a down year. At least one of the teams was vying for something. In last year's game, we had the two-star quarterbacks playing. That there was more of a vibe, a feel in the stadium, and it meant something to win the game. I wouldn't think in this game that a kid's going to decide, oh, I'm going to go to UCLA because they beat USC on this particular day.
Yeah, I don't think right now there's a whole lot of recruits out there that SC and UCLA are kind of both on. And this is in the past, there's been games where you could tell, like, whoever wins this game, it's going to affect recruiting because, maybe the Rose Bowl was on the line or for both teams, and they were both good programs. But I think right now they're both kind of doing their own thing recruiting-wise. UCLA, Chip Kelly seems to have like a very specific kind of player he likes to recruit. And USC, frankly, I think they're ranked 30th right now in the recruiting rankings, which is really low for them at this time. So I think the win might help them in recruiting more because people don't know what the coaching situation is. And I think recruits are like wondering, what's going on here with USC and who's going to be the coach next year. And their recruiting might get help more if they fire Helton and bring in a guy that can impress recruits. So, maybe losing helps recruiting because it'll ensure getting rid of Helton. That's what a lot of people are hoping, I think, a lot of fans.
USC and UCLA get together 12:30 local time, 3:30 on the East Coast. Fox is your network, and if you love the traditional rivalries, regardless of the records, it looks beautiful when these two teams get on the field with those uniform matchups, and especially at the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl obviously is unlike any other setting in college football. So I will be keeping an eye on USC and UCLA. It brings a lot of nostalgia to the table, of course. All right, Scott Wolf from Inside USC, please check out his platform right there. Anything in particular that you've got on the site right now that's of note?
If you go, it's insideusc.blog. I've got a column up there right now, and one of the things I talk about is the fans and their attitude and how surly they're getting towards the program right now. And then, I also have a little bit on the past history of the rivalry. And back in the 60s, the coaches from USC and UCLA used to get together and have cocktails the week of the game, which nowadays wouldn't happen anywhere, I don't think. So back in those days, there was a lot of socializing, and it was a little more casual, but I couldn't see any of that happening nowadays. So it was a much different period back in the 60s.
Sure. Interesting stuff. If you love college football history, right there with Scott Wolf, Inside USC. Scott, I appreciate the time. Thanks for dropping by.
Okay, I hope we can talk next week before Notre Dame.